We're at the end of January right now, so my question to everyone who started with that New Year's resolution of fuck yeah, 2026 is going to be the year that I'm going to be making games, I'm to ask you, how's it going? Because I feel like you're probably starting to run into some problems. And I want to talk about that in this video of like, why is it suddenly so fucking hard to make games when a month ago you were probably pretty high energy? I mean, this doesn't even need to be for New Year, but I just know there's always an influx with like people at the start of the year. Maybe you've been also doing this for 5 months, but at some point you're gonna feel like, damn, this kind of sucks. And I want to talk about that, kind of like why is this and what can you do about it? Because you started with all of this hype, this energy, you had this amazing game idea, you bashed out a prototype or you did something like a game jam or whatever. And then now we're a month into development and suddenly it feels like it's not really going that well anymore. It feels like progress has come to a stop. You're doubting your game, you're doubting your abilities as a game developer, all of that, and that's not what I want. I don't want you to quit game development, I just want you to keep being able to make games. This video will be broken up in 2 parts. First, it's like the doomer core, and then the hope core is going to be at the end, so you want to stay tuned for that. Of like, why is this? Why do we feel like this? And I think the biggest problem is that the basics of game development, like I said, like that prototype, is very simple. And you can run into this trap of, okay, I am developing my game and okay, I'm not sure what my mechanic is, but after a month you generally have a pretty good idea of what's my game's mechanic going to be. Is it going to be combat based? Is it a puzzle or whatever? And it's like, okay, I have this base of the game done. Now all that's left is to make content, because I have like 5 minutes of gameplay or whatever. I have a 5-minute gameplay loop, a 15-minute gameplay loop, but that is not enough to put on Steam. I need to make more enemies, more items, more levels, more puzzles, more everything basically. And it feels like on the one hand, this is like the thing that we always say as well, like, oh yeah, the game is basically done. All that it needs now is content. But on the other hand, it's the content that is like 80% of the game's development often, and it doesn't feel like that, because it's also not really the fun and interesting parts, making content. Mechanics is interesting, making your set piece is interesting, but just making like levels or anything like that, it's not really super interesting. If you ask me, hey, what do I know? And I think the first thing that you need to know here is that if you're not at this point yet, if you're still struggling with something else, or you're still considering starting game development, know that content is going to be the downfall of your motivation, most likely. It's not going to be the actual technical implementation, because that's also fun. That's solving problems. That is the essence of like game development, in terms of like, okay, I have this idea, I have this mechanic I want to do. I don't know yet right now how I'm gonna do it, but I can play around this kind of like visual most of the time. But once that's done, it's just making content, making levels and all of that. And I think just knowing that, hey, content is going to be a problem is already, I think, a great start. A second thing, like a piece of advice that I have here, if you are at that point of like making content, is to kind of batch making content. This is something that I see as well of like, okay, let's say your game has enemies and you have 3 enemies implemented already, you need to add another 5, and then your game's like content in terms of enemies is done. What I see like the approach then, and this may sound dumb, but this is what developers do, and maybe you do this as well, is like, okay, I implement 1 more enemy, but now it turns out like I kind of fucked up the balance and nothing is aligned anymore. Or you do this with level design as well, or like you design a level and you're using something that kind of you want to go back to your previous levels and implement as well. Don't do this. This kills like all of the speed that you have. What you do is you just implement stuff. You implement it and you don't really worry too much about like the balancing. You don't worry about like, hey, but how does this tie together with the stuff that I made before? Because you're also going to get better as a game developer over time. You're going to get better at implementing enemies and mechanics and levels design and all of that. And just focus on, okay, implementing this. And only once you've implemented all of the enemies, for example, that's when you're gonna go back into your balancing pass or whatever, where you're going to go back to those first previously created enemies and maybe like remaster them almost, making them better and fitting the more recent style. This is always going to be a problem in game development, but you shouldn't waste time needlessly on it by just going back every time you make a small change and then like going through this cascade effect of refactoring all of the things you've made before, only for you to have to repeat this entire process 3 days from now when you add a new piece of content once again to your game. A second problem that you run into, and this is one that once again we've had big problems with, is that you kind of at this point have become numb to your game. When you're making that game and that prototype at the start, it's like, oh, I'm having a blast. You're like quickly making those changes, you're trying out the game mechanic, you're probably doing something somewhat unique, and you'd really enjoy the game back then. But it does not matter what the game is that you're making. If you play this game and you playtest this game for basically every single day for months on end, you're going to get sick of your game at some point. Or maybe not sick of your game, but you're kind of going to play on autopilot. You're going to just know immediately, instinctively, what buttons to press. You know what's the most effective items to buy. And like, let's say your game has like 10 items. You're not going to buy 8 of them because you know like, oh, I developed these. I know these are going to be the best ones. And this is a very like kind of bad thing to have as well, because you're going to start doubting, hey, is this game even fun? Is this game even worth continuing development on? We're running into this now as well, where we've been working on the incremental game for almost a month at this point as well. And sometimes I also wonder like, hey, is this really still fun? Because I think the original idea we had was really interesting. And then when we had that first prototype, I was also still really hyped in it. And now it's kind of like, I don't know, is it still as good? Did I kind of just get used to it because I know like the ins and outs and every single bug and like all of the behind the scenes effects? And is that the reason I don't enjoy it? Or is it because the game actually isn't good? And more often than not, it is just going to be the fact that you know everything about that game. And I think the important thing to prevent this magic from being lost, and this is what we've done as well, is to develop your game. And when you start basically developing, your goal is immediately you're gonna pin like some date of like, we're going to throw this game on itch.io then, and we're gonna have like a first playtest. We're gonna figure out how exactly, but we want to get feedback for this game as fast as possible. That's what we're doing as well. Like the incremental game I'm talking about, I guess it's kind of a soft announcement now. Tomorrow, from like when this videos come out, we're gonna do like a live stream, and we're gonna invite like our audience to, hey, come and playtest this game with us, give us feedback, because we're kind of like staring ourselves blindly at this point, because we look at that same game day in and day out, and we just need to like get some external feedback. Now, of course, you may be yelling, oh, but it's easy for you because you have 50,000 subscribers who will all like play your game and give you feedback. There's some downsides to having that many playtesters as well, but you don't even need 50,000 people. You don't even need 50 people, honestly. Getting 5 to 10 people, especially in those early stages to play the game, is already enough. And the goal is simply to get reinvigorated, to get that confirmation of, okay, the game that I'm working on that I thought was fun, but that I've kind of lost my vision on, is actually still really fun. So don't be like, hey, I'm going to keep developing on this game until I feel like it's ready for a playtest. That's too late. But instead, work the opposite way. Be like, hey, I want to do a playtest by the end of the month, by the end of February, for example. What are the things that I would need to have done to do that? Don't just keep developing on your game and adding like all of these different mechanics that don't really make sense just yet now. Focus on, okay, what is the minimum version that I need to have a playtest? Use that as your scope for now and work towards that. And if the playtest happens and nobody cares about the game, then maybe it's time to change things up. But most of the time, honestly, you will probably still get some pretty good feedback for your game. Of course, it's not going to be a perfect 10 out of 10 game immediately, but it's going to be enough to keep you like engaged and knowing that, hey, what I'm working on here is actually worth it. Another like little tip that I have here is to kind of also lock in your mechanics so that, okay, we have a certain mechanic in our game. We've developed on it for 2 weeks. We think it's okay. Just be like, I'm not touching this anymore now until I've done the playtest. Because if you keep for the entire like 1 or 2 months or whatever, every week reworking and rethinking, oh, is this actually a good mechanic, yes or no? You're once again going to make yourself more miserable, and you're going to be making changes that honestly are going to be most likely unjustified. Make it in that first version, make it in that scope that you originally envisioned, and then just leave it for now, work on the rest of the game, work towards that playtest once again. It's a very important thing. And only after that feedback, maybe you can like unlock the mechanic and start working on it again. But until then, don't touch it. And then the last thing that you're going to be running into, that you may have run into as well, that kind of ties into the content as well, is that you're running into like these weeks where you're doing invisible work, is what I call it, where you start on a Monday or whatever, and you're like, okay, I'm going to refactor this combat system or whatever, okay? And then Friday hits or Sunday hits, and you're still maybe refactoring that combat system. And if you look back at like the state of the game, like visually, nothing has changed. You've just spent a week of development without seemingly any impact having been there. And subconsciously, you know, like, yeah, but I've done this refactor, it's very important for like the future of my game and whatever, because it's gonna be way more scalable, but it doesn't look like it. It doesn't look interesting, it doesn't look like you've actually made progress. And we humans and developers, we need like that positive affirmation of like, hey, the work you did last week was good work. It was work that needed to be done, because that's the case. But if you don't see like a flashy new GIF at the end of the week, it's going to be hard to quantify that to yourself. And I do have like a piece of advice for that we're going to talk about later in the Hope Course section of this video. But otherwise, I think another thing that I really want you to do is, and this is hard, I know it, but game development is hard, is like to try and at least like put like time limits on how long you do this invisible work at the same time. A refactor for a week, it's like, okay, it sucks, but it can be done. But doing that same invisible work for 5 weeks, 6 weeks, which is what we've done as well, that makes you miserable to the bone, where every day is kind of like the Groundhog Day of like, this is the same game. This is the same game. I'm not making any progress. It kills your motivation. It kills your will to keep going. And once again, if you started at New Year, you're 1 month into development now, this is going to be that point where you're starting to run into those things of like, hey, actually, I do need to do those like bigger refactors. I do need to do that more invisible work, and know that that's okay. It needs to happen, but also try to limit how much time you spend on it at one go. And then, okay, we get to the part where maybe you start hitting that wall where you don't really feel like you want to keep working on the game because, for example, the 3 things that I mentioned before, like you still need to do so much content, you feel kind of stuck, there's not really much visible progress, and you're going to ask yourself, okay, do I pivot or do I push through? And the first thing I'm going to say already is most of the time push through is honestly going to be the better answer, but it's also the harder answer. We pivoted, or well, cancelled too many games in 2025. It's one of my biggest regrets. I made like a whole video about it you can watch as well. This is a problem or a wall that you can hit sooner, basically, by once again targeting those playtests early, getting feedback earlier and seeing, okay, am I alone in this, or is this actually something that other people are interested in as well? Because, okay, let's say that you have a game that is in theory indeed fun, but that the scope is just too big, then the first thing is just to pivot, cut the scope, make it smaller. I think that's honestly not a bad thing to do. Like, I know bigger games are maybe more enticing, but I think small scoped games are honestly maybe better also in like 2026, and it's kind of what our studio is trying to do as well, because finishing a small game is better than abandoning your dream game. Like, at least you don't have that abandonment and you want to keep working on game development in general. I think that's also what I said in the video I mentioned earlier of like my 2026 goal and like our studio's 2026 goal is not to cancel games. It's simply to worst case ruthlessly cut down on scope, but always still release something, because having canceled games and fully been like, okay, this is not worth it because it's getting too hard for me, it leaves you with honestly not much. Yeah, sure, you've gained some experience, but at some point, it's similar to that invisible progress. You want to see some visible, like, you know, a Steam page, sales reports, anything like that, people downloading, reviews, all of that. You need that if you want to keep going as well. It's just needed for your sanity meter, basically. And okay, then we get to like the point of like, okay, we're going to push through. You've decided, hey, this game is worth it. I maybe need to make some changes, but I'm going to push through. And I think the problem then, and maybe this is something that people don't want to talk about, is that game development is not supposed to be fun 100% of the time. Of course, if it is fun 100% of the time, that would be amazing, but that is not really, I think, what you should expect from game development. At a certain point, you're going to need like discipline, especially if you want to take this as a full-time thing. You need to treat it like an actual job, and you can enjoy your job, but there will also be parts of your job that you will not like. Maybe you don't like marketing, maybe you don't like level design, but you still need to do all of them because that's kind of what you've chosen on. Because fun is less of the fuel then. Like, yeah, you still want to make a fun game, and you should probably not be 100% miserable throughout the entire development cycle, but you should also get rid of that notion of only wanting to work on your game when you have motivation, when the game is fun. And you can make game development fun again. Also, once again, when you get like more visual progress, when you get later in development, it gets more fun again. Trust me on that one. But there is going to be that valley of despair, basically, where you just need to push through it. You just need to keep going through the slog and keep going forward. I think one other thing in terms of like the cutting that I do want to mention here as well is that if you decide to cut features of like, okay, I'm gonna cut down my scope or whatever, don't do it in the middle of like a development cycle. The development cycle isn't like the full game, but basically it's like 2 to 4 week periods, kind of like mini milestones of like, okay, I'm going to implement this like stage, or I'm going to implement this bigger like boss fight or whatever. Don't in the middle of that implementation be like, actually this is too big. Always try to have like a nice wrap-up point. How we do this is in our studio, because we're multiple people, we have this concept called the Bite Me Core, which is just the 3 members of our studio, and we sit together and we like do like weekly updates on what we've been doing. And if we decide to cut features or to cut scope or all of that, we always wait until then. We always try to push through the slog until we reach that Friday evening for us of like, okay, now we're going to reevaluate. How has this been for us? And that way, if we are like on a Monday or a Tuesday of like, actually, I don't really think this is going that hot anymore, we still know, okay, let's give it until Friday. Let's push through a little bit longer. We can like develop with focus of like, okay, should we have to cut scope or something by Friday? What do I want to be certain about that we can kind of like wrap up at least to make a better decision, and only then make that decision. Not immediately be like, hey, I don't think this is going that hot, let's just immediately cut scope. Because once again, it's a slippery slope from then on to start like canceling more games and more projects and all of that, and I don't want that for you. Another thing that I think is perfectly normal to realize as well is the concept of good enough for now. Where in game development, you immediately see these hyper-polished games as like the end result, and I think there's been like some trends recently of like showing like the work in progress of your game on like Reddit or XD Everything app, but a lot of games that you like that look hyper-polished now looked very basic at the beginning. They were just simple prototypes, but the developers realized, okay, this is good enough for now, let's move on to the next thing, because you shouldn't spend all of your time immediately from the start on perfecting one single mechanic, because the rest of the game is going to fall behind and you're not going to make progress fast enough to want to keep working on that game. I think what you need to do, and kind of you do this, but I think we need to like focus on it even harder, is treat game development as iteratively as possible. I think that's part of the meta as well of getting that playtest up as soon as possible, doing multiple rounds of playtesting before you get to the demo, of like iteratively, every few months basically, you're going to level up the game from like, you started a 4 out of 10 game. It's like, yeah, fun, but it's like ugly, it's not really that engaging for long term. And then, okay, you've done that first playtest round. You now evolve to a 5 out of 10 game, a 6 out of 10 game a few months later, because you just keep doing multiple passes. You start with like, the game is basically just a prototype. Then the game is somewhat playable. Then it's like, okay, this is actually somewhat decent. Then you get to the point of like, okay, now it's actually looking like something I don't feel embarrassed charging money for. And these are different phases of your game's development, and it's going to take months most likely to go through all of them. But it's way better to have this approach of like, okay, this is good enough for now as like my playable prototype or my playable playtest. I know I can go back to this in a month and I can completely revamp and like make it more polished, and I have more feedback to work on as well, and then revisit it and lift it up just a little bit to improve the art, to improve the mechanics, to improve one of those things, versus immediately having that idea of the game I make has to be a 10 out of 10 from the start. The mechanic you're working on, the level or whatever. These things are honestly pretty easy to work on iteratively, so you should aim to do that as well. And then coming back to that like invisible progress, I think one other great thing that you can do is by just having a list of like small wins, is what I call it. These are like things that honestly are maybe sometimes kind of dumb or aren't really super important, but they're visual, and their main use is just to show to yourself that like, hey, this game is making progress. Every time that I work on this game, it's going a little bit better. And it's like dumb stuff, like having better game feel for your buttons or whatever like that. That is like, do I need this right now? Probably not. There's other more important stuff I can work on right now. But if you have just not really been doing much progress for like visual progress, having these tiny things that you can do in like 20 minutes, 30 minutes or whatever at most, that still have somewhat of a measurable impact in the overall game basically, are worth it. Having a list of all of these things that when you come up with them, you just write down and don't immediately do it, and then just use them as like a little break in between your big like invisible refactors. These are great solutions for that. They need to be done at some point anyways, and they probably don't really need to be done at the start of your game's development cycle, but they are a good point where you kind of feel like, am I still doing okay? Am I still doing a good job right now? I'm not really sure. That is a good point where you pull out that list basically and you do one of those small implementations, one of those small fixes. Like at the end of the day, I wish I could give you like better advice, maybe even of like tell you that, you know, this will get better, and like kind of it will get better. But I've been doing this for 4 years, and you know, this is something that you're going to get for every game that you develop. This is something you get multiple times throughout your entire game development process. So the goal isn't to avoid doing that slog, basically, doing all of that, like, you know, maybe not great feeling game development work, because you cannot avoid this. There will always be something like this, like making content, like doing like those invisible rewrites. But the goal is for this video to help you be able to navigate through it, navigate through the slog, because at some point you're going to climb out of the valley of despair and you're going to enjoy your game again. And I know that because I've been through that as well. And I just want you to know that there is like light at the end of the tunnel, basically, but you need to suffer a little bit. He needs to suck a little bit before you can get to that point. Like, no great game is going to be made by you just complaining about, hey, game development isn't nice. It's like, it has ups and downs, like everything in life at the end of the day. And you just need to keep going at it. And giving up is the easiest answer, always. But I've learned now as well that even though it's the easiest thing to do, it may not always be the right thing to do. And I think we just need to keep pushing a little bit harder. You, me, we just need to keep working harder on our games. Because that way, you know, you're making the games that are worth making. You're making the games that actually require development. And they actually require doing stuff that maybe has never been done before. Kind of breaking through the barrier of what you can do with game design and all of that. So if you're doing that, I wish you the best of luck. And if you want to follow our journey in how we are also navigating all of this and the games that we're making, I want to ask you a favor as well and head down below and subscribe, because it tells me also that you guys enjoy this video. I want to keep making these videos as well. I want to keep sharing the things that we learn, because I think we have some very good videos coming up as well in February, talking about like Next Fest and things like that. Thank you very much for watching. If you're in this content grind set right now as well, leave a comment down below and we can together wallow in our misery. But know that I think that we can all escape it. It's gonna get better, but it needs to suck for a while before we can get to the good stuff. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!